paid advertisement is just not, it's very biased information versus, a genuine recommendation or genuine partnership is just a much better source of information for making decisions.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Influence Factory by the Influencer Marketing Factory. Today with me we have Conor Begley, that is the co-founder of Tribe Dynamics and Chief Strategy Officer and Board Observer at CreatorIQ. If you're new to this show, I wanted to invite you to subscribe us to Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. We have new guests and new episode every single Wednesday. Enjoy the show. Hey Conor, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Alessandro?
It's all good. Like another week, a lot of things to do. Many different, but you know the feeling, right? Like every week is somehow the same for certain things and a bit, different because in our industry, everything is changing every single day, right? So
totally. Yeah, it's funny. I was out for 2 weeks, which is a longer vacation than I've taken in a while. And it was like I missed a lot and I missed nothing at all. So it was, one of those
that sounds
things.
like social media to me lately,
Yeah, forever basically. So,
oh my God. So yeah, usually, of course, the first question for me all the time is, about the guest. So why don't you just give a bit background about yourself? How did you start it? How did you got into influencer marketing? Your previous role and what are you working on right now?
yeah, for sure. So, co-founded a company called Tribe Dynamics about 11 years ago. Got into the space because I was so I graduated, went to a startup company that grew very quickly. Then I went and lived in Australia for about 7 months. While I was out there, I ended up doing some consulting, this really cool up and coming brewery. We realized that the bars for us were kind of influencers, right? So, they'd have and this is pre-Instagram, but they'd have 1,000 fans on their Facebook page. And so we'd go to these bars, we'd interview the bartenders, we'd take some cool photography of them and publish it. And, then what would happen is the bartenders would see it. All the locals who followed that Facebook page would see it because it'd be like our favorite bars and bartenders. And, we'd see our sales in those bars go up because, those bartenders were more likely to recommend our beer. And so I was talking to a good friend of mine and he had been on the paid search side of things. Paid Google searches and stuff. And he had run a bunch of analytics that basically said, the more tweets about your brand, the easier, the cheaper it was to advertise. And he's like, and I think, the cart's driving the horse here, right? I think that the more well-known your brand are, the more effective your advertising is, right? The cheaper it is. And so we're like, this feels like a really big deal now that everybody's becoming publishers. So let's get into it. And then, we combined, I got acquired by a company called CreatorIQ about 18 months ago. And they're very complementary to us, both in terms of product, in terms of customer base, and in terms of skill sets. And so, we're now the largest player in the space by a good margin and, operating from there.
So you said 11 years ago, it's when you started getting into it was a different environment, different industry. It was there were no trackings, no metrics, was based on, I feel it, so it changed a lot, Of course, we can talk more about the past and everything, but let's talk about the present. There is a lot of, activity, especially in the M&A, right? Merger and acquisition on the influencer marketing side, traditional media agencies or, big conglomerates acquiring influencer marketing agencies, acquiring influencer marketing platforms. So what's happening and why now?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely happening. We were part of that, right? So we got acquired. I think we're probably the largest acquisition in the space at this point. I think. So I think there's a few things that happen, right? So when new categories emerge, there's a ton of players, right? So this new thing, influencer marketing, it's a big deal. I think there's 180 companies on G2 or something like that. And so, so everybody goes, oh, it's this shiny new object. Let's go and let's get it, right? Whether you're an agency or a platform or whatever. And then what happens is as you get further into it, you get 3, 5, 7 years into it, the winners start to emerge, right? And then the ones who are, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth in line, particularly on the platform side, start to struggle, right? And so then they start looking for, okay, what is the next step, right? And then also I think there's a lot of, one of the more common playbooks within the private equity space, right? So private equity invests in companies, is to kind of combine these companies to build a larger platform, which ends up giving you significantly better advantages across a variety of spectrums, right? So for us, a big part of us combining is, being the largest player in the space, you get better access to partnerships, better access to capital, right? Investors, clients trust you more, right? Clients want to pick Salesforce. They don't want to pick the fifth best CRM system or the fifth biggest CRM system. And so there's just a lot of strategic advantages to being big, basically, right? And so that was a big part of the reason that we, did it, in addition to the fact that we really liked the team and, et cetera. So it's definitely happening, this kind of consolidation phase. It's very common within new markets that emerge to go through this expansion phase where there's a bunch of new companies, and then this consolidation phase where they start to merge together, right? Or be acquired or whatever, or die off, right? There's a lot that die off too, just shut down or get acquired. And so certainly what's happening right now for sure.
And, it's definitely hot right now as a topic, but it seems that still, a lot of people cannot comprehend and understand the real power of an influencer marketer, right? Like, it's a hot topic, but I would say that still it's still a niche market, right? Compared to if we take the traditional media spending, for example, or the typical studio productions, right? Where you need a crew, licenses, and, insurance for, there are so many costs involved, while instead with an influencer, sometimes you just need a person with their phone, right? And can, even, do 2-3x what maybe, a big production can do in terms of reach, in terms of conversions, and so on. So even if influencer marketing, we know that works very well and sometimes can beat other media, why is still a niche again compared to traditional media? Like, why is it going slower than what is maybe supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a long time for people to change habits, right? So I think and then I think in a lot of ways, what's happened in digital marketing is that people have gotten very tied to, ROI, right? Like, hey, I put X dollars into Facebook ads and I got X dollars out. And the reality is that the equation there is much more complex than Facebook and Google are making it seem, right? But because we looked at, as an example, like when we sign a client, it's like there's like 25 touch points between like when they first hear about us and when they sign up. They might attend 2 or 3 events. They might download 4 or 5 documents. They might attend a webinar. They might have a few phone calls, right? Like they might read our emails, like all those touch points. And it's like, but like the last click is what gets the credit, right? And so the last touch point. And so anyways, so I think that has been part of the problem, right? Now, I think what happens over time is that, impact dollars tend to follow impact. So what do I mean by that, right? Well, let's think about like how people make decisions. So that's something I think a lot about. Like, how do I decide to buy this vacuum, or how do I decide to attend this event, or how do I decide to go sign up for Tribe or Influencer Marketing Factory, whatever, right? I think the number of people making decisions because of an Instagram ad or Google ad is not nearly as high as the spend, right? So I think the amount of money getting spent on it and the impact that it's having in terms of decision making is off, right? And I think alternatively, if you were to look on the influencer side of things, like how often do I make a decision because somebody I follow that I trust that's an expert in the market recommends a product or a service? Like quite high, right? Like I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw this woman who like reviews movies and she was losing her mind about Oppenheimer, right? Like, and I was like, oh shit, I need to go watch Oppenheimer, right? Like that has a very visceral impact on my decision making. And so anyways, the reality is she isn't capturing that yet, right? That financial impact that she's driving. But I think it will shift over time, right? It's only natural because as a brand, if you're Oppenheimer and you can say, hey, I can put a bunch of money into Facebook ads, and I'm not trying to pick on Facebook, let's say any kind of paid advertising medium. As a consumer, that's just not a very good source of information, right? Like paid advertisement is just not, it's very biased information versus, a genuine recommendation or genuine partnership is just a much better source of information for making decisions. And so what will happen is over time, money will flow in that direction. And it is, right? I mean, the growth rates on influencer marketing far outpace paid advertising. It's just, it takes 25 years really most of the time to make these kinds of shifts.
Is your brand ready to amplify its reach? Well, the Influencer Marketing Factory is here for you. We are a global influencer marketing agency helping brands ignite their growth. From influencer identification to campaign strategy, handling legalities and agreements, to managing shipping and logistics, we got you all covered. We work with hundreds of brands across different verticals, from Fortune 500 companies to direct-to-consumer brands. And we don't just stop there. With detailed ROI analysis, we help brands like yours measure success, transforming impressions into conversions. You can find us at theinfluencermarketingfactory.com or just searching the Influencer Marketing Factory on Google.
No, yeah, you're right. I mean, it takes time for people to adapt to new things. And something also that I noticed that, finally, right, we moved from only, either vanity metrics or just, the touch and feel of a, influencer marketing campaign and tone of voice, whatever, all those things that are absolutely important, right? But at the end of the day, especially now, brand marketers, they need to associate an ROI, right, to influencers. And so I like that you shared a lot of data lately in the past months. I was checking your LinkedIn, and I like that you went really in detail, right? Like it's not that common, at least in our industry, to see Excel file basically screenshotted and right, published it. Because we all do feedbacks and analysis of the industry, and yeah, we throw some numbers, but numbers usually are part of the storytelling. No, you just basically took screenshots and we analyzed those. And I like that approach because finally we can show that, again, influencer marketing is just more than, silly dancing video, whatever, but actually you can sell, you can influence the others, you can do things. So on that, is there any metrics, any numbers, something that either shocked you, something that you were not expecting, something that, we were like, interesting. Now that I see this data, this makes sense or this doesn't make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a few things that are fun, right, that have stood out to me and been surprising to me. And maybe taking a step back, I think that part of where we have found a lot of success is we knew that this was impacting things, right? We knew that these TikTok videos where somebody was genuinely recommending Oppenheimer were having a big impact on the actual sales at Oppenheimer tickets, right? And so what I felt like was a big part of our mission was to shine the flashlight on that stuff and be like, hey guys, look over here, right? Look at this relationship. This is crazy, right? And during our very early days, the way that we did that was we would highlight these brands that were growing very quickly. And then they would go on to have very large acquisitions for lots and lots of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases. And so, people would go, oh shit, this stuff's really real. We're not talking about driving $50,000 through a coupon code. We're talking about, multi-billion dollar outcomes or billions of dollars worth of market share shifting. And so anyway, so that's always been our mission. We very much did that in the beauty and fashion space. And I think lately we've been pushing into other categories. I think some of the things that are most surprising is you look at we can correlate influencer content to major league ticket sales, right? And that's looking at, okay, how many people are talking about a Major League Baseball team in 2022? And then how many tickets did they sell in 2023? And it's 8 times more correlated than whether or not they're winning games. So if you are a winning baseball team, it matters a lot less than whether or not everybody is talking about you online, right? Even if the Houston Astros as an example, we're the number 3 by ticket sales or number 3 by ticket sales, top 5 by buzz, but we're barely above 500, right? They weren't even a winning baseball team. And so I think that, those kinds of learnings I think are fascinating, right? Those connections in terms of outcomes. And so that's kind of some of the exciting stuff I like.
As marketing, we realize is that influencer marketing is also moving away, or it should maybe move away from the one-time activation, right, to having a better retention, right? So using maybe the same influencers over and over, or at least use the ones that brought in the most conversions. So how can a brand can move from this one activation, one shot with specific influencers and going more on the retention base? And also why is it that important for marketers?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts about this question and the way that you talk about it is that you talk about influencer retention as this like well-worn concept, right? And I think why that's one of my favorite things is like, I'm pretty sure I know for a fact we invented influencer retention like 2 years ago. Like we just started. And so I think that's the first thing. It's like crazy that it's become just a thing now that the industry thinks about. And I think to your point about like the importance of it and why we talk about it is, when we looked at our own business, right? The way that we are judged as a business at CreatorIQ, the primary way that we are judged is like retention. Like when we get a customer in, do they stay with us, right? And that has a dramatic impact on the value of the business and a dramatic impact, frankly, on the performance of the business. So like if you go from an 80% retention rate to a 90% retention rate, your average customer lifetime goes from 5 years to 10 years, right? So it doubles the average time that you keep a customer. And so, in looking at that, what we realized was like, hey, wait, what if we apply this same lens to influencers, right? Would it play out? And it turns out it is by far the most predictive measurement for growth that we have. Far and away, bar none, nothing else comes close in terms of predicting whether or not you will do well this year, you will grow this year in terms of the number of influencers talking about you. And so to your point on this kind of one-off versus kind of long-term relationship, that should have a very big impact on how you approach these creators, right? And where we've seen it go wrong, there's a variety of ways that we've seen it go wrong, but is like, hey, I've been working with this influencer for 5 years. Like, I think I need to like reach new audiences, which is definitely something that you should do, right? But what happens in that scenario? That person goes, oh, wow, I've been supporting this brand for a long time. I've been talking about them for years. And now they've left me and they're paying somebody else that doesn't even care about the brand, right? And everybody else goes, oh, if I talk about the brand, or if I, and all those people are talking about them organically go, wait, why are you paying them and not paying me? Like, I love the brand. I talk about it all the time, right? And so alternatively, you can have these second order effects or halo effects that occur if you pay people that are organic fans of the brand. So like if somebody's talking about the brand all the time and then you bring them in, you make them an long-term ambassador to the company, all the other influencers go, oh, crap, if I talk about this brand, maybe that will happen for me too, right? Maybe I will also get a long-term contract. And so what it results in is everybody else being much more likely to talk about you over time as well, right? And so, anyways, we have found retention as a concept to be the most important metric for growth, predicting growth and long-term success. And then again, the way that you get there is by taking the people that are organically supporting your brand, building long-term relationships with those people to drive both lifetime value with them, as well as to drive halo effects with everybody else. Because, oh, if I talk about the brand, maybe this will happen for me too, right? And so, so that's the way I think about kind of long-term relationships versus one-off.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Like traction is not necessarily that difficult to achieve, especially if you got funding and everything. We saw that with a lot of social media apps, a lot of utility apps, a lot of, new features coming up that maybe have the hype for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever. But then, so retention, if retention is important with any other marketing, like, branches and approaches, this should also be the same, right, with influencers. So I do agree with that with you. And what are some of the other do's and don'ts when it comes to campaigns? I know that some of them are common sense, right? But is there anything else you identify that if you do these, might not be a success 100%, but at least you are in the right direction? And the thing that you should never do when working with influencers and do an influencer marketing activation? Yeah,
I think there's a few things, right? So to take a step back in terms of, the company. So, we started tracking all these influencers, just measuring them and trying to figure out which brands they're talking about, right? And then we saw certain brands kind of blow up in our metrics. So the first one was a company called NYX Cosmetics, which frankly, I thought was some airport in New York that we were picking up a false signal on, right? Like LAX, NYX, because it, it was beating, we're tracking all these influencers and they were more talking about it than Maybelline or Cover, all these multi-billion-dollar brands.
Yeah.
And so, so anyways, so that fast forward, that company gets acquired for $500 million by L'Oreal. We got a lot of attention because we were the only ones publishing data on it. And we said, hey, maybe there's something here, right? And we saw those patterns again and again and again. There's a company called Too Faced. They got bought for $1.5 billion. Then Anastasia Beverly Hills got valued at $2 to $3 billion. Then in fashion, you had Fashion Nova, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. Gymshark, which got valued at $1.5 billion. You see it with Celsius on the beverage side, on and on and on and on, right? And so what we tried to do was to have conversations with those people and say, hey, Nyx, hey, Fashion Nova, hey, Too Faced, hey, Celsius, what are you doing, right? What are you doing that's different than everybody else? Because clearly your numbers are popping in our data and it's leading to these very large economic outcomes. So we're just making a ton of money. And so what we found was a few kind of consistent principles, right? So the first one was, you might have support of an agency, right? So you work with Influencer Marketing Factory to support the brand, but ultimately there is an in-house team that is very much focused on owning these relationships, right? And they are very much focused on long-term relationships. They tended to work with thousands of influencers, not dozens. So it wasn't about going out and finding Kim Kardashian and paying her to talk about you as much as it was, gifting 2,000 influencers and then working on long-term partnerships with the top tier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So almost always an in-house process, about half the time with the support of an agency, right? They tend to work with thousands of influencers versus dozens. They tended to focus a lot more on organic content rather than paid content. So you could use paid content and paid relationships to amplify and gain more organic content. But again, going back to that Oppenheimer example, organic support is just more likely to actually drive changes in people's choices and opinions. And so how can you do that, right? And the fourth was they tended to start working with people that were really, that were young and then growing with them, right? And often helping them to grow. And so a good kind of a simple way to think about this is like, it's better to build a relationship with Kim Kardashian when she was Paris Hilton's assistant, right, 10 years ago, than it is today, right? Like back then, she didn't have anybody paying attention to her. Today, it's going to cost you millions of dollars to get anything out of her, right? And so the way that works out mathematically is about 6% of micro influencers. So if you have 100,000 fans or fewer, about 6% of those people will surpass that threshold, right, each year. And then what happens is that group is like, once you pass 100,000 fans on, say, Instagram, it's like a rock rolling downhill, right? You tend to go full time, you professionalize, you just take it a lot more seriously. So once you get past 100,000 fans, 1 out of every 4 will surpass 300,000 fans next year. And then 1 out of every 3 will surpass 1 million fans the following year. And so when you invest in those little guys, those micro creators, you're investing in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And so in terms of do's and don'ts, those are really the do's, right? I think in terms of the don'ts, like you said, this is a well-worn territory, but like influencers know their audiences better than you do. So being like really prescriptive about the content they need to create pisses them off, pisses their audience off, generally doesn't perform very well, right? Treating them as transactions or one-offs generally does not work very well. I think trying to find influencers that are cross-category is a very common tactic, generally does not work very well. So like trying to get a fashion influencer to talk about a beauty company, although logically that makes sense, the reality is if they've never talked about beauty in the past, they're very unlikely to talk about it today, right? In the same way as like trying to get a sports influencer to talk about, I don't know, like a cookbook, right? Like it's just not what they talk about. That's not their area of expertise. Even if the demographics of their audience line up with your brand, the reality is that content's generally not going to perform very well, right? And also doesn't have all those secondary or second order effects, halo effects, or LTV drivers. So anyways, long story short, those are some of the do's and don'ts that I think about.
And, before earlier you said about, organic content that perform well, right? Many times, even more than paid ads, because we all know that when you are, creating something that comes from, your heart or something that you're really passionate about, people can easily understand that, right? So we're in a moment in time where, creator-led marketing, right? It's sometimes, you're not always nowadays, basically beating, right? The typical, again, boring corporate, paid media. So do you have any tips on how to mastering like this approach, right? Both on the creator side, like how can you become even better in creating, like, again, this type of marketing that comes from you as a creator. And also the second question is on the brand side. Many brands still have this sort of like, it's difficult for them to, just lay back a bit and be like, you know what, I can trust these people, I can trust these content creators, I will give them freedom. And sometimes still they prefer to go corporate, scripted, and they don't work, right? So any tips for both the parties, content creators on the one side and brand marketers on the other?
Yeah. So I think on the content creator side of things, when you're looking at a creator, there's a few things that like predict growth, right? And I think that ultimately points to the type of content you create and the way that you should approach the problem. And I've been doing this a little bit myself and it's working, right? Which is pretty cool. So a few things, right? So one, in terms of predicting growth, right? Or, what actually drives growth, frequency of creating content is really important, right? So fast growth influencers produce about 73% more content than slow growth influencers. Building community and interacting with your community is very, very critical, right? So on average, influencers that are fast growth versus those that are slow growth get tagged by other people a little bit more than twice as often, right? So like you are sharing photos, doing activities together, collaborating on content. Like you'll see this with Mr. Beast, right? He's constantly doing collaborations with other creators because you share audiences, you grow together. And the third is having a variety of content, right? So obviously you're going to have your content that's like your specialty and what you do. But what we find with people that have like, product post, it just doesn't, they don't perform as well, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to have a mixture of content that's both personal so that people can connect with you, as well as content that's more around your expertise, right? And so anyways, and the other one I really like, I love this example. I interviewed this team that's just killing it. I think they went from 4 million to 75 million in revenue, 75 million to 150 million in revenue. It's this kind of group of 2 or 3 brands that's killing it. And when I asked him, he used to talk about community building. I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by community building? He's like, well, when you start an Instagram page, he's like, you have 0 fans. He's like, and then you get 1. He's like, what do you do when you get your first fan? So you shoot him a message like, hey, thanks so much for following me. Like, let me know however I can be helpful. And he's like, so we just started doing that. And he's like, it ended up turning into a massive direct sales channel for us, as well as a way that we actually built very direct connections with our community and our audience. And I was like, well, you can't honestly be doing that today. Like each one of your brands has hundreds of thousands of fans, right? He's like, no, absolutely. We still make it our goal to message every single person that follows us, right? And it's like, wow, like that's crazy. Like I've never heard of that before. And again, I've started doing my own kind of publishing. So, which I'd never published anything before, but up to about 5,000 fans on LinkedIn and growing really fast, should be north of 10,000 at the end of the year and growing from there. It's like we message every single person that follows me, and it like has a cumulative effect over time, right? A meaningful effect, especially if you send a real message. And so that's we'll say on the kind of creator side of things. And then on the brand side of things, I'm trying to think of what could you kind of repeat the question? So in terms of the brand side, what question are we trying to answer there?
Yeah. So basically, how can you move from, more of a typical corporate scripted, paid media, type of content to more of a creator-led, again, type of content, or user-generated content, creator-generated content, like anything like that is, again, a bit more, outside, out of the box many times, with their specific tone of voice, right, of the specific influencer. And one we notice that many brands still, they want to own, right, the message. They want to own the way out it is delivered. And too many times brands are a bit afraid, right, to open up completely and trust the influencers. So do you have any tips on the brand marketer side on how you can actually embrace this new way of doing marketing and try to, avoid maybe to only use one way that was the corporate from the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a really big challenge, right? I think it's really difficult. Now, what I'll say though, so that kind of creator-led marketing is another term that I think we've kind of tried to put out in the ecosystem that seems to be gaining some traction. And I think the kind of premise of it to your point, is that historically, like when influencers first started, right, it's very much about like, hey, I've got these people with large fans and I want them to talk about my movie Oppenheimer, right? And so, I build a relationship, I give them a special screening, I do whatever, and they do that, right? And then I think what's happened over time, right? So that's really kind of call it the, earned media and maybe even a little bit of paid media, right? I'll pay them to talk about me. And so I think what's, to your point, what has changed is as a brand, the requirement for you to create assets is at an all-time high, right? You got to do Instagram posts every day. You got to have new stuff on your website. You got to have material for your email marketing. You got to have new material for your Facebook ads, right? Like you need new content all the time in a bunch of different languages at a bunch of different angles, et cetera. And so first and foremost, creating all that content, super expensive, timely, hard, et cetera. I think number two, what you're finding is that consumers are very much connecting with content that is created by people they know, they trust, that's unique, different, interesting, et cetera. And so it's just performing a lot better, right? It's converting people more frequently on the website pages. It's like driving higher ROAS through your ads. It's driving better conversion rates on your email marketing. And so I think the integration, so taking influencers and now making them kind of the center and their assets, the center of that marketing funnel, and then having that operate throughout the rest of the marketing kind of internal marketing ecosystem is what's occurring, right? And I think that's really, those two areas are merging over the last several years in like quite a meaningful way that's important. And so the question is like, how do you do it? I think one of the most difficult challenges there is really embracing that like you aren't going to be able to control the look, the feel, the messaging in the same way that you could in the past, right? And instilling in your brand a comfort level with risk associated with that content that, a lot of the times it's not going to work. It's not going to succeed, but, we still need to try it, right? We still need to experiment. And it's not, just because this person isn't the person we would make the face of the brand doesn't mean that we can't honor and support the love that they show us, right? And I think that's still a very big challenge for a lot of brands. I think there's a lot of brands that struggle with this concept of not having the perfect aesthetics or not having the perfect spokesperson. But, like, hey, if this person loves you and they're talking about you all the time, like who gives a shit, right? Support that love. And in a lot of ways, like there's these really cool set of people on Twitter. I wish I could remember his name, but just search like ugly ads. It's like, you know what the best performing ads are? Ugly ads. Like he'll do an ad where it's like he'll write down like shit on a Post-it note, take a photo, and that'll be the best performing ad they do, right? It's like a Post-it note, like versus these highly produced ads. So anyways, there's some thoughts on that.
I mean, it's real, right? It's the same piece of paper that you could have like, takes notes on. It's very relatable. It's also I think that because we came from like all these years of perfect things, perfect images, you don't trust them anymore. You want to go back to basics and be like, maybe I trust more this person than instead of like, showing me a Lamborghini, it's showing me the ROI, the CTR, and the CPI of this campaign. So I can check the numbers and be like, okay, straight to the point. These are the results, input, output. Let me go and check on that, right?
Totally.
Just selling the dream. You want to sell like on real things, on data, on what to expect, right? So that's why.
I think to your point earlier, right? So I'm publishing all this stuff now. And that post you mentioned, one of the posts that I did, like, it's like a screenshot from a spreadsheet, shows some data, et cetera. And I won't name who it was, but somebody that was fairly senior in our organization was like, man, I hate that we can't get like more polished stuff for your content. Like, I want it to be more polished. And I was like, that's not what I want. I was like, this is the opposite of what I want, right? Like I want it to feel real, fast, timely, like straight from my desk, right? Like, and the only way to do that, frankly, is to do it that way anyways. And that the post that he complained about ended up being the best performing one I ever put out, right? Was, it's like, so anyways, to your point.
No, but, and also on that, before going to the next question, it is that someone was, I think I already said in another episode about this, but someone was saying only customers, only the people reading, only the people watching actually will, choose the winner between the A/B testing. And so many marketers have a cognitive bias on being like, oh, this is the content that will always work, so it will work, right? So they put it out and they think, and then maybe they do an A/B testing like, yeah, let's also try this other thing. But it's like, it's like the angle is strong, the lighting is not the best. Yeah, let's put it out. Many times that is performing better than the super polished, again, in a studio, weeks of like, preparation. Why? Because again, people want to see something that is real, something that more authentic, something that can relate to, right? So my message all the time is like, test things. You won't know up until you have data. You cannot only have your guts, because that can tell you only part of the story, but then you need to analyze, right, things. So
totally. Well, and again, I think that like, 100%, whether you want to call it like lo-fi or like authentic or whatever it is, right? Like, I think people yearn for that. There's been too much polished content for too long. So
now this is the present. What is the future of influencer marketing? What is missing in the game right now?
So definitely want to answer the question. But one of the things I do think is like really important, like, so I remember Jeff Bezos got asked this question. It's like, what's going to happen in the future? He's like, predicting the future is really, really hard, right?
Yeah.
He's like, but like knowing like what won't change is actually much easier and is like much easier to build around. So the example he used was like, at Amazon, we know people are always going to want it faster. They're always going to want it cheaper, and they're always going to want more options, right?
Yeah.
And so what does that lead me to? Like, okay, well, if I want it to be faster, then maybe I should build drone delivery technology, right? Because that will help me deliver it faster and cheaper, right? Or, hey, if I want to have more variety for people to choose from, then I should make it really easy for third parties to sell on Amazon, right? And so saying like, these are the core pillars that I don't expect to change, and building around those, I think is actually a much more, I think it's an easier way to build around long term. And so for me, the things that I know, right, about the influencer marketing space that I don't expect to change are like, people are going to want to learn from people for a very long time, right? It's much easier. People want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from random corporate brand, right? So I know that won't change. I know that like organic recommendations are going to be more trustworthy than paid ads, right? I know that for a fact. That will not change, right? I know that the genie's not going to go back in the bottle. We're not going to go back to like magazines, right? The democratization of publishing has occurred. There are only going to be more and more publishers over time because the cost of publishing is so much lower, right? And frankly, I think that like, and so anyways, so I think those are some of the things that I think about in terms of pillars, right? Like, what can I build around? How should I think about how this changes my approach over time? So like as an example, say a new platform kind of pops up. I know that organic content is still going to be the stuff that people trust. I know that relationships are still going to drive what like people talk about. I know, right? Like I know these things. And so now if we were to make some predictions, right, I think that, one of the things that's overstated is new platforms, right? So like in the last 10 years, there's been one platform that has emerged and sustained. That was TikTok. Every other platform has, gotten hot and died. So whether that's Clubhouse or Vine or Yik Yak or Be Real or whatever, the one that was like Polaroid, right? Like it's actually very, 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 very difficult to build a platform that succeeds. And so, with that being said, I think that, that doesn't mean that you can't capture the moment, right? Like we went on Clubhouse, we did it, we got a large follow, or, got a bunch of people involved. It was fun. It was cutting edge. We're perceived as being cutting edge because we're playing around with the new platforms. So it doesn't mean you can't do that, but, know that it's very rare that they emerge in a sustainable way. Let's think what else. I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts in terms of the future and what's going on. Actually, I think last one. I think that there will be, people will continue to, like, we will slowly uncover how big the iceberg is, right? How big the mountain is. I think right now we're still very much seeing only a little bit in terms of how big the effect is of these publishers on economic outcomes for brands, entities, whatever. And so I think the industry is going to continue to grow for a very long time, call it the next 10 years, right? As people kind of slowly figure it out.
Yeah, no, I think so. Again, it's funny to me anytime that I see like some media being like, is influencer marketing dead? That's like every year there is something. And to be honest, for still other marketers listening, that happened also for SEO. I've been in the game of SEO for many years, and every year there is like, is SEO dead? Every single year. And
well,
now
like email marketing, right? Email marketing had like a resurgence like 3 or 4 years ago. And it's like, how long has email marketing been around, you know?
Yeah, no, right. It's a cycle of things, right? Everyone was like, emails. Oh, I got so many. I don't. And now everyone is subscribing on newsletter through, like
Substack
and MailChimp, all the others, right? And me included. Sometimes I'm like, okay, let me subscribe to this just another newsletter that nobody wants to read. That's me. Yes, so.
Well, again, what happens, right? Because it's so cheap to start a newsletter or so cheap to start a website or so cheap to start an Instagram page, right? It just leads to more and more publishers about more and more niche topics, right? It's like, I love the Detroit Lions. There's now 3 podcasts about the Detroit Lions only. Like I don't have to listen to a generic sports podcast or a generic NFL podcast. I can listen to a podcast about my team, about this, so it's like that will continue to happen over time.
Yeah, no, I do agree. We were in another episode with someone else discussing about the really niche related, like, marketing communities, very specific, long tail keyword type of things, like, very, very, very specific. And maybe usually what they do is that they create some of these and they sell them out to, maybe a media buyer that can put all together and basically create a media conglomerate, or they just go so like in depth when it comes to one specific thing. And around that, they do the website, the newsletter, the podcast, merchandising, events, webinars, everything, right? So I do agree that nowadays it's very easy to create everything because it's so cheap and it's so simple, right? And user-friendly. Fantastic. I think that we covered many, many topics. Is there anything, last minute thing that you want to add on top? Anything that is really exciting you that you want to share with us today?
I don't think so. I think it's just, excited about the space, excited to support people. So feel free to reach out to me. My email address is just Conor, CONOR at CreatorIQ.com. So easy to find me. So if I can be supportive, whether you're a student or a professor or somebody that's just passionate about the space, let me know. Reach out. Happy to help.
Fantastic. Conor, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing knowledge, data, semi predictions / what is not gonna happen because what is gonna happen depending on things that you can predict. I also love that perspective there. And congratulations on what you built. Best of luck of new things that again every day is different. So very curious to see what is gonna happen there.
100%. Thanks, Alessandro.
This was the Influence Factor by the Influence Marketing Factory. I'll see you next week.